Hello, everyone, and welcome to Boost Pickup. I am your host, Vaudable, joined with my lovely co-host, Hunted, or Jeff. You can call him
Yep.
whatever. I'm assuming he goes by both. How are you feeling about the matches we had this most recent weekend?
Not very good, man. It was a rough week, number one, for me specifically. I think I didn't get a chance to count all of our predictions compared to one another, but
Yeah.
I know that there were a couple of big surprises, at least to me, especially on in the rival series. So,
Oh, yeah.
I'm hoping that week two goes a little bit better.
Well, we'll have to see once we check all the results and give you guys our predictions about a lot of these matchups. But it's just going to be an insane few weeks. And this is only going to be week two of the season. So there's still a lot more that can happen. This is basically almost done with CRL too, because it's only like 3 weeks, which
Oh
is
yeah.
also a crazy thing too. So that'll be wrapped up pretty soon with the B stream predictions we're doing for that, because there are way too many matchups to get into all of that. But let's start with the RLCS. We kind of shortened things a little bit just because we're going to take more time with some of these matchups. So we aren't going to be doing South America and OC. Sorry, we still love the region, but there's just too much to cover with all these teams that are in the rival series now and all the teams in CRL and RLCS. They'll be adding more too. So in the future, we might add it. Right now, we're going into RLCS and got to go over those matches that just happened in this past week for North America, because some of those we both kind of like traded on. I think our peeps
Yeah.
picks for that one.
Yeah, that was the surprising part to me. Ghost played much better than I thought they would, especially out of the gate, and the Peeps just weren't ready, or the Pittsburgh Knights, I should say, weren't ready for that. And Rogue just looked flat from the get-go. They didn't look very good compared to their Pittsburgh counterparts. So, yeah, it's an interesting first week. I mean, of course, Ghost ended up losing to Cloud9 a little bit later on, as you can see there. That wasn't a great series for them. So it looks like NA is kind of shaking out the way we expect it to, but there's a little bit of mix up kind of in the middle of the pack, if you will.
I mean, that's typically what happens, especially with all the roster changes. Excuse me, that happened in the offseason. So still hard to predict those first few matches, but as the season goes on, going to be a lot easier to tell as the gap kind of gets wider between the top and the bottom, and then the middle will just be kind of a conundrum at some point. But let's move on to see what our predictions were and kind of compare those to the actual results that happened. We're still working on getting the point totals up, so maybe next week we'll have those and see exactly who is in the lead. But I want to see how well Twitter also did against
Oh
the
yeah.
actual results that we saw, because the first one, I feel like most people thought the Peeps were going to win against Ghost. And that was the big thing that really threw us all off. Yeah, all three, including Twitter, thought the Peeps would win that one. But it just did not work out for any of our predictions there. And then I was the only one who had faith in the Pittsburgh Knights against Rogue. But I didn't expect it to be a 3-0. I thought it'd be a lot closer than it was.
Yeah, it was a crazy matchup. Really, Rogue, like I said, they looked super flat coming out of the gate, and that is not what I expected from a team that ended their last season quite well. They played well in tournaments in the off season, and it just feels like they kind of are missing a key piece of what they need, or they're just they missed a step here. And maybe the Peeps, they said we can't play the way we played against Ghosts. Let's ramp it up against Rogue, and they did good things. It could have been, of course, that the nerve factor, of course, a couple of newer players on Rogue, not rookies necessarily, but new players in the scene in general. So, you know, I'm not counting Rogue out, but if we look at the predictions for next week, I'm not giving Rogue my blessing until they
Yeah,
show me something different.
we got to see a lot more, especially after a 3-0 from the Pittsburgh Knights. We like looking at the matchups that'll be happening next week. We got NRG versus Birds, Ghost versus Rogue, Pittsburgh versus Cloud9, Space Station versus Birds, and then NRG versus G2. It's just a lot of those matches aren't weighed in the favor of Birds and Rogue specifically. The biggest thing I think that we disagreed on was the space station and Birds matchup there. But I still feel like we need to see more from both of these teams to really like tell who's gonna be the dominant team, I guess, in that matchup.
Yeah, this was kind of my this was my bracket busting pick, if you will, here.
Yes.
Because I mean, you look at all of them, of course, NRG versus Bird. It's kind of going to go one way, I think, to NRG. Ghost and Rogue, of course. We saw kind of how they played against equal opponents last time. But I still think that the Birds and the Bees are a team that can perform well. And against Space Station, who, like you said, is a team that we need to see something from this season. It could be that kind of moment, that kickstart that the Birds need to get started in the RLCS.
And, after facing NRG, if they do fare well against them, that's just going to help them even more against Space Station. So we have to wait till the matches actually happen. Just going over the Twitter polls that people said, there's like almost 50 votes for the first one, and NRG versus Birds, it was 96% for NRG. So, I mean, we all agreed on the Ghost matchup just because we haven't seen enough from Rogue, but hopefully they surprise us. Not hopefully for Ghost, because those are great players too, but we still have to see more of that roster. Cloud9 against the Knights, that's just the usual.
Yeah.
And then, the Birds versus Space Station, it's got to be a close matchup, I feel. But the Space Station definitely has a lot more to prove compared to the Birds, I feel, on that one.
Yeah, I want to see. I think it would be interesting to see when you put in your picks, because it seems like you're taking a lot of your cues from Twitter on these. But I mean, this week should be pretty straightforward in NA. I think the two big matchups, of course, Ghost and Rogue, Space Station and Birds, and it could go either way in either series. But I'm gonna say it right now that I'm right.
Well, we'll see what happens. I guess at the end of the week to see which team comes out on top in that matchup. But I feel like the rest of the predictions that we've had for week 2 of season 8, it's pretty no-brainer for most of those. Only one really Ghost, as we've mentioned a few times. Still hoping Rogue can turn it around. They didn't really have the greatest season last time, but they still made it to the World Championship because they weren't in the bottom 2. So they still have potential to do it. They're just going to have a long road ahead of them because there's so many more challenging teams that they're going to be facing later on. Because if they lose to the Pittsburgh Knights and then lose to Ghost, Birds is really the only team left that they might have a chance against. And if they don't do well there, then their season's pretty much a wash.
And speaking of Pittsburgh, actually, a good friend of both you and I, Dazarin, is hosting the Play Against Pittsburgh tournament. I'm not entirely sure. It's happening tonight.
Yeah, it's
and
some
the
like
winner
Knights tournament. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, right. It's the Knights now, but it's happening tonight, and the winner of that tournament gets the honor of playing against the Pittsburgh Knights in a series, and I think they get a bunch of cool stuff as well. And I was a little disheartened that I couldn't get to play in that. I think it's about to start here in a little while, but
it's called Night Drive, like KNIGHT. Interesting naming, but it's good to see some of the orgs actually run tournaments through Smash GG and actually be as involved as the Pittsburgh Knights have been. So great to see that involvement from them. Hopefully some of the other orgs actually pitch in and run some events for people to compete against their players. I know Dignitas at the World Championship, they had Violent Panda out there, and he was 1v1ing a lot of people, and that was actually great to see that kind of pop up, even though they didn't make it. But speaking of Dignitas and EU, let's go over the results that we saw for that first weekend. Veloce doing a lot better than expected. Complexity, not really the greatest performance against either of the two teams, so they're going to have a struggle this season. Then Barcelona, they should have won that matchup, all things considered, but they've been struggling recently, it feels like. And it's TSM with the reverse sweep. There's so much to talk about here.
I am 90% sure I picked TSM in that matchup. I know I did. I remember.
Yeah, you definitely did, because I was like, I saw it at the beginning, and then I tuned down like, oh, Mao's got this. They're up 2-0. Yeah. And then I look at the results at the end. I'm like, man, I should have. I know Alpha's good, but I didn't think he'd carry that hard. So.
Well, see, this is the thing, and this might be a bit out there. Maybe not out there, but it might be controversial. I think Alpha made the wrong choice of going with TSM.
Oh yeah,
Alpha is such
I
a
agree.
great player, and I don't know the backstory. I don't know if he's making a lot of money. I don't know any of that.
Probably.
But just purely from a competitive standpoint, Alpha did not surround himself with players that are going to elevate his play. He surrounded himself with players that he will have to not carry, but he will have to lead into
Oh
these
yeah.
victories. And we saw that week 1. We saw that perfectly. It was the Alpha show in those last 3 games. And TSM as a team with Metza and Remco, I still to this day maintain that Ignite was not the problem with TSM.
Oh no,
And
I agree with that too. I feel like it's just the chemistry between
sure,
all three of the players that was going on there. And Remco and Metza, I feel like they just don't have the right play style to really push the top envelope of the RLCS. So hopefully with Alpha and as the weeks go on, they'll get better, but it's kind of hard to tell. Yeah, Shamako in the chat is like, Alpha likes the Alpha show. He does like to show off, but it's going to be tough when you're constantly having to be that main deciding factor for your team's victories. And we saw that a similar thing almost happened with Dignitas with oh my goodness, Astral. Like looking at the running for Golden Striker, Clutch Playmaker, and Savior of the Season, so that's goals, assists, and saves. He's in the top 3 for all of those after the first week.
Oh, yeah.
And his teammates were like nowhere to be found in that either. So we need to see a lot more from the remaining players of both Dignitas and TSM. So hopefully this next week they'll do good. Let's look at our predictions on this one and see how close we were. I know we weren't as close as we wanted in that the first matchup or the third one either, because we did not expect Veloce to go up 2-0 against Complexity and Dignitas.
Yeah, I could. Yeah. Veloce, even coming out of this week with 1 win was surprising to me, and the fact that they started 2-0 is quite crazy. And I think, obviously Twitter agreed with us as well. And just looking at the Reddit posts and stuff from this past week, I think everybody's kind of shocked that Veloce is doing well. However, that doesn't mean that they can't continue to do well.
True.
I mean, they showed some really good things. And granted, you talked about Dignitas and how it was the Astral show. I mean, we had the Alpha show and we had the Astral show. And I think just based on fantasy, I don't know if you're playing fantasy this season, but I think Astral last week was 2nd or maybe 3rd in total fantasy points.
Yeah.
So certainly a guy to potentially pick up for your fantasy teams if you're looking for somebody. But that said, I think Dignitas has the tools and the experience there to turn it around. It's 1 loss in week 1 against a team that you were most likely underestimating. Should be a wake-up call. Hopefully Violent Panda and Yukio turn it on, help out Astral, and they continue to play well. But Vitality, I think, that was a pretty straightforward matchup for us. And then I am super happy with my TSM pick. It's vindicated.
It was as close as we expected it. We expected it to go to 5 games, but not in the fashion it did. And a similar thing happened to the Barcelona and Reciprocity matchup. Barcelona up by 2, and then they just could not keep up with that momentum. Reciprocity, they've been known to come back in those dire situations. So they've been looking good. I feel like next week they're going to look pretty solid as well. So we can already get into those matches that we'll see next week. And I feel like just based on the results this week kind of influenced the decisions of my predictions specifically for this next one, because TSM are a lot higher up than they were originally for me personally. But there's also some tough teams they're going to be facing off against in Reciprocity and Barcelona. And Barcelona, they have a lot more to prove now too. You could see it on Twitter. Those guys were devastated, especially Ronaki. He's a very emotional player. So he's looking to kind of strike back strongly this next week. So hopefully they'll be able to really perform well, but it won't look good for Mouse if that happens, because they'll be 0-2 after the second week. And the matchup I guess I'm looking most forward to seeing is that TSM Reciprocity matchup, because that one I feel like is going to be a good one.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I do just want to acknowledge Chimako in chat. He took my joke, man. He took my joke. I was going to say it's the first game with a South American coach for the Barcelona squad. Didn't turn out, but I think we talked about that last week with Barca.
Yeah.
They're a very inconsistent team, and maybe they'll find their consistency a little bit this week. But I do have to agree with you. TSM Reciprocity, my most looking forward to match. I don't know how this is going to go, but I don't really
a lot
care.
of matches this upcoming week for Europe specifically. North America, kind of easier to tell what's going to happen there. Europe right now, based on what happened last week, is just like, what? Like, it's going to be a miracle if we get all of them right. Let's look at our predictions for Europe here. So both of us kind of had Barcelona coming out, except Twitter. They thought Mouse would win. So we'll see if Twitter's correct on that one. Obviously, going for TSM on the Reciprocity. I know. But why did you go against Barcelona? That's the big question for me personally.
Well, yeah. I mean, I had to go with TSM after they pulled through for me in a reverse sweep fashion last week. Vitality, of course. I'm surprised that you didn't pick Dignitas against Complexity.
So here's my reasoning for this one. So Complexity, just knowing the players in general, going 0-2, they kind of probably expected the loss against Vitality, but not against Veloce. So I feel like they're the kind of players that will grind their hearts out if they go down in that kind of a fashion, especially against a team who lost in the promotion tournament and basically got promoted because Triple Trouble disbanded. Even though they went 7-0 in the season for Rival Series, losing to who the players are on Veloce, I feel like will just fuel the Complexity roster enough to take down Dignitas more than Dignitas losing that matchup against Veloce.
Well, I have one word to dispute your claim, and that is Astral.
Yeah,
that's all that you have to say about Dignitas.
Doesn't have an Astral, that's for sure. But I feel like the roster as a whole will kind of gel together a little bit more if Astral doesn't show up that week.
Sure. All right. Well, we're gonna have to find out on that. And yeah, you called me out on not picking TSM against Barca. I think it's more because of the reaction that I saw from the Barca players.
Yeah.
You can tell that they really want this, right? It's not just another season. They want to come out ahead of every game, every match, doesn't matter. And I think that they turn that around. Like I said, again, I will say it. Inconsistency is their biggest killer. But when they're on and they're focused and ready, they are so good. And I just don't think TSM, even with Alpha, I don't think TSM's going to take that.
True. That is very true. It's so tough this season for Europe specifically because there's so many great teams that are pretty inconsistent when it comes to results. They are either like very hot and cold, and we've seen that happen multiple times with TSM as a roster, multiple times with Barcelona as a roster. Reciprocity, they've been pretty consistent, but if TSM show up like they did last week, Reciprocity are probably going to fall there. That's why I was predicting TSM to win that one, but I predicted Reciprocity to win that one, but that's mainly because of the consistency of Reciprocity and how fickle that TSM are. But it's going to be tough. After this week, it'll be easier for the remaining 3 weeks to kind of tell how the matches are going to go. Because looking ahead even that far, Veloce versus Reciprocity, if Veloce somehow beat Vitality, I mean, that's a no-brainer that they're probably going to beat Reciprocity. Barcelona, if they do well and win both their matches, they're going to most likely beat Dignitas, and so on and so forth. It's just these first 2 weeks, especially with Europe, very hard to predict, which is why there's like more matches here than in North America that we kind of are disputed on.
That's just the nature of the regions. I mean, yeah. Well, we talked about that too with North America, that it shakes out the way that it shakes out just about every season. Nobody's been able to challenge the masters of North America in the past seasons, and it doesn't look like it's going to happen this time either. But, again, only week 1. We're into week 2 now. I'm just excited, and I know that we're going to move on to the Rival Series. We're starting with NA first, thankfully, because I have absolutely no idea what's happening in Europe.
Man, yeah, I have no idea what's happening in Europe either, but though the matches that we did see this week for the Rival Series, like looking at the results of this one, Afterthought versus Team Chaos, that was such a close matchup. It was amazing to see. There was almost a 7-minute overtime, 3 separate overtimes in that best of 5 series. It's all you could have ever wanted to start off the Rival Series strong, which it was a great thing to see that happen, but it makes me worry a little bit for Afterthought, and we'll talk about that in the other predictions. But the biggest surprise really there was Compadres against Full Metal Gaming, or FMG as they like to be called. I didn't expect it to be that big of a win. I thought it would go to 5 games, but they did have 2 overtime, so it was a little closer than the results say there. And looking at our predictions, I think we were pretty bang on for all except that last one. I think I edged out over on that one because I thought FMG, who were going by Nefarious, were going to take the win there. But that's just because of the play-ins, and Compadres, I think they doubt themselves too much.
I'm surprised that they faltered as much as they did against Full Metal Gaming after coming off that victory. Yeah. I really thought that would help them, steady themselves. Granted, it's upper 90, and I don't say that with malice or anything, but upper 90's been that team that nobody expects to make the Rival Series, and then they make Rival Series,
and then they don't really do anything.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I would really like to see upper 90 step up a little bit to the plate. But if you look at their next matches, which we're going to look at here in a second, they've got RBG and Full Metal Gaming. And both of those
the ones
teams,
that they're playing against. Yeah. I think those are 2 other teams that are probably going to beat them too, just based on what we've seen so far. We really need to see upper 90 kind of step up. And a cool announcement that happened. We didn't really have time to change things before the show, but Paradox, who were the former Splice roster, it is now called the Charlotte Phoenix, which they got picked up by CLT Esports. I believe that's correct on that one. And they're going to be playing with Karma, Jaywiz, and Shadow as their main roster. Dude actually is subbing this season. So We'll see how that roster goes for that.
I think it's a good change. I think Dude with a Nose has been a wonderful player throughout his time in both the RLCS and the Rival Series. But I like that they're giving Shadow a chance to really show what he can do. And, you have that classic combo of Karma and Jaywiz. It's going to be tough for most of these Rival Series teams to deal with. And I expect them to play well in their first week. I mean, you said it. They have that first or they have that org now, so they're not orgless anymore. And actually, a lot of teams in North America getting picked up by orgs, FMG and Plot Twist going to Chaos now. So yeah. I don't know. I'm interested. I can't wait to see what Twitter says about these upcoming games.
Yeah, it's gonna be nice. And just to correct the overlay there, it's actually Bullsend versus Zookeepers. And Zookeepers also, it's nice that all these teams finally have logos too. The Zookeepers, they have like a little elephant with some stars in the moon. It's pretty nice. But Linked Up's just a simple chain link. It's easy enough. They're probably waiting to get picked up if they hopefully get into the RLCS, because there are 4 teams that could potentially promote from the Rival Series, so that'll be a pretty crazy event if that happens. But we also have the B-Stream matches that have already been announced. We're not going over the ones that are off-stream because those are kind of scheduled at weird times, and some of us are involved in those, so we kind of know the results already. But Afterthought versus FMG, that's going to be a pretty good one. We also have Linked Up versus Zookeepers. Just to correct that. Oh, yeah. Linked Up versus Zookeepers. Compadres versus Paradox, which are now the Phoenix. And we also have, which team am I missing? Compadre. No. Afterthought versus Linked Up. That's what it is. I was just messed up by the logo there. But yeah, these are going to be some good matches. And we finally get to see Linked Up on the B stream for their debut. And a lot of people are really talking this team up as potentially top 2.
Well, I mean, if you look at the roster, it's Sosa, Joe Freshness, and Alpha Kep, and
Yeah.
that's a lot of experience and a team that I certainly expected to kind of walk their way through plans. They did a wonderful job to get there, and we saw them last season in the rival series, and they put on a quality show. They weren't able to quite get to the top, but now things are a little different. They're a bit more experienced. They're not fresh into the scene, into the rival series anyway. And looking at their opponents, the only one that I'm afraid of for Linked Up is Afterthought, who they're going to be playing against this week. All of the other teams, I think they have a chance against even Charlotte, which is ex Splice. So, I'm looking forward to them, and I really, really think that I agree with you that they will make top 2 and could even potentially qualify.
It's going to be great to see how well this team performs, especially if they live up to the hype that everyone's been giving them so far. I think we have a chance to go over our predictions for the rival series. So we got all agreed on how RBG would do. Bullsend versus Zookeepers. I want to know why you think the Zookeepers are going to beat Bullsend.
Because, man, you've got to admire the way that Zookeepers have been playing recently, especially in the play-ins. We didn't see them week number 1. We saw Bullsend against Upper 90. Again,
true,
a team that I don't really put a benchmark up for anybody. And Bullsend hasn't looked great recently. After coming off that win at WGN, they haven't looked amazing. And I think the Zookeepers capitalize on that. I think they get their first win in their first game. And I will, again, be happy to tell you that I'm right this time.
I know you were cheering for them in the play-ins as well, and Porklet specifically, he really stepped up to the plate in their series to qualify, but it's going to be a pretty tough match. I don't think it's going to be a blowout for sure. I think this one is going to be one of the harder ones for Bullsend, especially, as you mentioned, due to their struggles recently. And Bullsend, even though they look confident against Upper 90, we're kind of guessing that Upper 90 is going to be towards the bottom half, at least, of the rival series, after all things are said and done there. So not too much to really talk about that. RBG versus now Phoenix. Why do you think they're going to win? Or why do you think Twitter thought that they would win that one?
Yeah, I'm not sure about Twitter's thought process on this. I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with a little bit of bias towards X-Splice or Charlotte now. And I mean, we had such high expectations for Splice going into rivalry or into RLCS.
Yeah, into RLCS. Yeah.
And they just didn't perform. And it felt bad because you were like, man, they could really make a push. And it just kind of all blew up and they've dropped down. Maybe there's still a little bit of lingering among the community. But personally for me, and I think you'd agree with me as well, that that lineup is still such a quality talent. And they've been playing together, at least Karma and Jaywiz have been playing together for such a long time, that even though RBG has looked great and is another team that I say could potentially qualify next season, it's so hard for me to give them the nod over top of Charlotte here.
Just because the experience that Charlotte has, so it seems like a no-brainer that Charlotte are going to win that one. But we could always see upsets. Maybe playing with Shadow isn't going to work out as well as they would want to. But I feel like Jimmer, the coach for that team, as he was on the Splice roster, still sticking with them. After the acquisition with this new organization, I feel like he's going to just be putting in the extra mile to make sure that they perform up to their standard that they've set themselves, because they set themselves as RLCS level, but we haven't seen that from them recently. So hopefully they'll be able to improve and really show everyone that they're here to stay, not in the RLCS or not in the rival series, excuse me, but stay in the RLCS and not get dropped out and actually have a chance to auto qualify too. So that'll be interesting. Let's quickly go to those B stream matches. I think the main one that I feel like is going to be a tough one is Afterthought versus Linked Up.
I can't believe you picked Linked Up for this match.
So the reasoning behind this is because how hard it seemed it was for Afterthought to win against Team Chaos. We know these players are really good on Team Chaos, Taroko, Mektos, and Corrupted G. Corrupted G
Yeah.
having the most experience out of that roster, but based on the way that we've kind of seen linked up in the offseason, we haven't seen, I feel like, enough from this Afterthought roster. That's the only reason why I think linked up is going to take that, because the way that Sathu, Shock, and Dapper work is if they get into their own heads, they kind of defeat themselves. And we've kind of seen that with Dapper in the past, whereas sometimes he's just not able to step up and then his whole team suffers for it. And if linked up get the first game and then get the second game, going to be downhill from there. And I don't think Afterthought is really that roster that can pull off a full reverse sweep against that kind of a team.
Look, I was giving linked up. I was praising them a little bit earlier. I mean, literally 5 minutes ago. And in this matchup, linked up is going to be the Afterthought. Just because I do not see Afterthought having any trouble with this team. And it's weird to say that, but you mentioned that they struggled against Chaos. I see it as they overcame Chaos. This was Corrupted G's, this was, we're seeing Corrupted G in the Rival Series again. This should be awesome. This should be his moment to shine. And Afterthought absolutely stomped that into the ground. Granted, it took them 5 games, but they still managed to beat this team that, is a team that should, on paper, beat just about anybody. And I think Afterthought bring that experience with Sathu especially to take down Linked Up, who I just don't think has what it takes to overcome Afterthought. As much as I cheer for Linked Up, as much as I like their team, Afterthought is just they're just too good. They're not going to lose a game this season.
Ooh. I don't know. I feel like they are going to lose a series this season. It just depends on who, because of the way those players are. I know Shock sometimes gets into his own head from what we've seen in the past too, especially at WGN when they were actually at the LAN itself. But that was with a different roster. They do have Sathu and Dapper. Very strong team. Nonetheless, I think Linked Up still have a solid chance because they aren't as prone to that tilt. That's the main reason for me personally. So we'll have to see what happens with that. It's going to be a great matchup as well. I feel like Compadres don't really have a shot against the Charlotte, just because how we've seen so far from them. They struggle against FMG, and I feel like they're going to be more middle of the pack based on what we've seen so far. But still, it's going to take time to really tell how these teams will fare, especially with 10 teams in the Rival Series. I think really the only thing we kind of know is that Afterthought are going to be somewhere near the top, and Upper 90 are going to be pretty much almost at the bottom. And that's really all we kind of know at this point.
We'll see.
And now we have to see EU, which is just... I don't know, man. You thought EU for RLCS was crazy. Well, then take a look at a Rival Series. The results from last week. Team Echo Zulu versus Baguette Squad. I kind of expected that just based on... I had outsider knowledge help me on that one a little bit. But I did not expect Discombobulators to 3-1 ARG in that fashion. That was just mind-blowing.
Dude, I am full... Baguette Squad all the way now. Yep. After watching them, I am on the Baguette hype train. Seriously, they looked incredibly good, and I did not expect that. I knew that the French scene, of course. I mean, you have Vitality, who just recent world champions. 2 of the 3 players are French, and you know that the French are very good at Rocket League. But man, do the Baguette Squad look good. They look so good that I could seriously see them in RLCS next season. But that said, the Discombobulators, like you said, they 3-1 ARG. That was cool. Was not expecting that at all. And nope. I'm excited that we have 2 teams that are relatively unknown, at least to the casual EU observer like you and I are. I mean,
Yeah.
we're not entrenched in EU like we are in NA. So, I'm super excited, and I might have to get myself a little bit of some Baguette Squad merch to support the team, dude. They sell anything?
I hope so. That'd be great. Like we need merch for all these teams. Like it's really easy to set that up. So definitely do that if any of them are actually
Yeah, come on.
listening in.
Get me the Baguette Squad store. I will be your first customer.
So speaking of Baguette Squad and Discombobulators, both of those teams are facing next week for the first matchup, or I guess this week, not next week. Tomorrow, actually. Excuse me.
Yeah, tomorrow.
So that'll be a pretty intense matchup there. I got to look at our picks for this one because I think we were kind of split on
Take
who
a
would
guess on what I picked.
I'm guessing you went with Baguette Squad. Is that correct?
Indeed, okay, cool. I did.
Yeah, that's going to be a pretty good one there, as I think I went with Discombobulators. Let me check just to make sure. No, I also went with Baguette Squad. we were both under the same wavelength there and knew that Baguette Squad would most likely take the win. I feel like Discombobulators, they still have a lot to prove, and they kind of even responded to the poll last week saying that people need to watch out and vote for them. And I think we both voted ARG in our predictions against them. And then I thought Baguette Squad would win the two. So it was only 3 matches last week. So it was pretty nice to see Baguette Squad really step up. Underwater Squad, is that? Yeah, Underwater Squad. There's a lot of squads in the Rival Series. Them against Fadeaway, that's just going to be a wash. Fadeaway totally going to take that one.
Well, hold on, because I did pick Fadeaway, but
it is a good team. Bilbo, Lottie, and Ocelon.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
you can't just
but it's
count
Tigreal, iGnite, and Extra.
I know. And iGnite kind of sells that team for me. I mean, I don't know. I think Underwater Squad has a chance. I picked Fadeaway, I know, but can't just write them off, man. Got to give them a chance.
No, I think it will be. It won't be a 3-0 for sure. I think it's gonna at least be one game for Underwater Squad. I don't think Underwater Squad are gonna win. If they do, then I just have no idea who's gonna come out on top this season. Like that'll just throw everything for a loop for me personally. The next match we had Discombobulators versus Team Vertex. That one I also am not 100% on. I think Discombobulators will take it just based on what we saw with them against ARG. And I believe that's what I said it would be. Yeah, Discombobulators. And then the next one is Method versus Team Echo Zulu. And Method, now that they have Tadpole on their roster with Rick Sarande and Burrito B, who have been a duo for such a long time, I feel like this is the season for Method to really show up, especially having a player like Tadpole on their roster.
Especially if ARG is going to falter as well.
Yeah.
Of course, Baguette Squad's going to be number 1. There's no question about that.
Then maybe Method.
Then Method, number 2. But yeah, I totally think that this could be the chance for Method to really shine this season. I'm interested. When do Method and Baguette Squad play? Because that will be my favorite matchup to watch. I think it's not until
next
late.
Week.
Is it next week? Okay.
Yeah, on the main stream.
So I'm definitely going to be watching that closely because I think Method, they have their opportunity now. Didn't see them in week 1. Granted, it was a short week, just the B stream, but in week 2. We get to see them come together. I don't have a lot of knowledge on current Method just because I haven't had a chance to watch them so much, them being in Europe. But
so they still remained in the Rival Series last season.
Right.
And they traded out one of their players. I forget exactly who it was. Sorry, Europe. I need to pay attention to you a little bit more, but you're always all over the place. It's hard to keep track. But having Tadpole go from Triple Trouble, who actually made it to the World Championship and did decently well, all things considered with that roster. I feel like that's just going to elevate them even further, give them kind of the consistency they've been lacking for such a long time. Because Rick Sarande and Burrito B are great players. They just lack the third that's really been able to mesh well enough with their play style. So with Tadpole in there if they've grinded it out enough, and if they dominate Team Echo Zulu here in their next matchup during the B stream, I think they're just going to take that one and go the distance against most of these teams because of the just the players alone on that roster. And looking at the B stream that'll be happening, some of these matchups are pretty interesting. Flomp Reset, the players on that team, Godsmilla though and Noli. Godsmill has been around for a while. So has those other two players. They participated in, I think they were in Gfinity during whenever they did those broadcasts. So I feel like they're going to do pretty well. Pepitos Kenyans, hard to pronounce. That's the mainly Spanish team with Ghostfire in there. I have a lot of doubts for this roster. And I've heard Ghostfire has had some iffy performances every so often. So I just don't have enough data on them or faith for them to take the victory against Flomp Reset or Method. I think ARG, they will have a lot to prove here. So I think they're going to take their victories against Flomp Reset and Team Vertex because of how well they did last season and because they're going to want to come back strong after losing to Discombobulators. Because I feel like that was just a wake-up call for ARG. And if it wasn't, they're going to be in dire straits.
Yeah, this one seems a little bit more straightforward to me.
Yeah.
You know, Flomp Resant. I don't know if that's exactly how you're supposed to say it. Yeah,
I said reset for some
yes,
reason.
You
My
did.
brain just like changes to reset. I thought the entire time it was reset. That makes more sense.
Well, I think that they are a quality team because I've actually seen their players play a little bit more than the Spanish squad, and I know that what they can do. Tho is such a quality player that it's hard for me to bet against him. ARG versus Vertex. Vertex, a little bit disappointing. I expected more from them in week one. I think I even picked them in week one and didn't quite get the result. And then, Method is Method, ARG, and Flomp. That's one's a little bit close.
One. Yeah, I feel like that'll be the close.
I still think I went with ARG. I'm not 100%. I think I did. Just because I'm still holding out hope for that ARG squad to come together and play well.
Same.
But if they don't do well this week, if they only go 1-1, it's going to be scary for the rest of the season.
Yeah, that's the thing for some of these teams that you expect so much out of. If they are struggling against the middle or bottom of the pack teams that you kind of expect going into the Rival Series or RLCS, they haven't even faced the top of the league yet. So if they're going to have to face them later on, it's just going to get worse and worse. And we kind of saw that happen in the RLCS with Ghost last season. They had a lot of their matches earlier on, and they lost to teams that you wouldn't have expected. They still stayed in, and they didn't have to worry about going into that promo relegation. But, they still didn't really look too solid that season because the other teams just looked worse than they did. So it's just going to be a slippery slope if ARG find themselves with 0-3 after this week.
Yeah.
Even 1-2, that's still not going to be the result they want because they have such a tougher road ahead of them after week 2. So that's going to be a very contested series of matches for them coming up this week. And I keep saying this, and it's a crutch word for me, but I am so excited, and it's so true though, because there's such great Rocket League going to be happening this weekend, and that has been happening. And speaking of great Rocket League and lots of it, there's been the CRL that's been going on, the Eastern and Western conferences. We'll start with the Eastern, but as you'd expect, Akron kind of sitting on top for the regular standings, only lost a single game and have won 21 games.
Yeah, and funny enough, their one lost game was against Rutgers University, who has not been doing very well, and it was their first game of the entire season. So Akron dropped one game, they got mad, and they said, we're not dropping another game for the rest of the season. And so far, so good for them. And really, Akron's running away with the East. I think that right now it's Akron and almost kind of Grand Valley and everybody else. But really, Akron, Grand Valley, everyone else. And
yeah. I mean, even University of Central Florida, most people didn't really expect them to be in the position they're at right now, but they still have, I think, 4 more matches. So we could see them either stay up at the top or just fall straight to the bottom too.
Yeah, well,
or not straight to the bottom, but to the middle of the pack.
Right, sure. I mean, there's still risk for just about every team.
Yeah.
You know, assuming Akron doesn't have a devastating blow up at the end of the season, they are pretty safe.
Yeah.
But everybody else, I mean, there's still plenty of matches left for them to have to play. Could be scary, but it's weird. The East has been weird this season because teams are losing to each other, and it's not what you would expect. I mean, I can't remember exactly who it was. I was looking at it earlier. Waterloo is such a the epitome of what I'm talking about here, because look at the teams that they've beaten. They beat Ohio State. They beat Rowan, and then and North Texas. They beat North Texas, or I'm sorry, not North Texas. USF.
Yeah, University of South Florida. They also beat
they beat GVSU.
Grand Valley. Yeah.
Yes. So they're beating teams, but then they're losing to teams like RIT, and it doesn't make sense. They're losing. They lost 0-3 to Stockton, and Stockton's not a bad team, but Stockton hasn't looked good compared to everybody else. It's very weird how things are playing out. Almost like teams are kind of they're playing their best games against the best opponents, and then they're underestimating the others. And it's working out for teams like Northern Virginia, who find themselves sitting at 4-2 on the season and have a good chance of qualifying if they can continue to play the way they are. There's so much happening in the East, but none of it makes sense with the exception of Akron just winning.
Let's go over. This is why we're just mainly covering like the B stream matches, because that's all we really have time to, because there's 16 teams in both conferences, and it's round robin, so they each have to play each other once, which is just insane. Like looking at Wikipedia, there's just a giant bracket where you can see all the teams that have faced each other so far, and there's just so many open spots.
Since you
like
mentioned
USF have only played 3 games so far.
Yeah, well, that's not a good look for them. And just because you mentioned Wikipedia, I do want to give a shout out to Jasher, who's really put in a lot of work to make sure everything is updated on that Wikipedia page. I've been helping him off and on here and there, but big ups to Jasher covering both sides of the bracket as well, and it's a lot of work. But anyway, I mean, if you haven't checked out the Wikipedia page, please go visit it. It's actually awesome because you get to see everything.
To update stuff
and
too.
Yes, do. I think Lucas was even in the chat as well at one point. So, big thank you to Lucas, who's been, the man behind Wikipedia. So, yeah, do go help them out if possible. Anyway, before we run too long, Vod, we do need to get into our predictions.
Yeah, so we can just skip the ones from last week, but UCF beating University of Michigan, that was pretty insane to see there. Nova beating RIT, kind of expected a little bit. UCF beating UW wasn't quite expected, and then Michigan beating Nova very closely. That was also another close one, but we'll have time maybe next week to go over all that. I feel like probably once all the CRL matches are done, we can just take some time to just review it all, because that's really what you got to do with CRL, it seems. But this is kind of experimental, as we've been trying to see how predictions go and analyzing all these matches, especially with how many there are going on. But as you mentioned, going on to the Eastern matchups we have this week, UCF versus RIT. I feel like UCF, just based on the results alone, are probably going to take that one against RIT. But RIT have also looked pretty decent with the 4 matches they have won, but they have also lost 6. So there's just so many games, and I think I voted for UCF, or made the prediction that they would take the win against RIT, just because of some of the teams that UCF have been able to take down, because most of their losses are against kind of the top teams, and the ones that they have won were against the other teams. What's up?
Well, yeah, most of their losses are against top teams, with the exception of like Rutgers.
Yeah, that's true.
And well, actually, either way. Anyway, all I'm saying is that UCF very off and on team. I voted against them last week. I voted for them this week, and I really hope they don't disappoint me against RIT, because it's a winnable game for them, and they need the win.
They definitely need as many of those as they can, especially with how many teams still have lots of games to play, because they can easily shoot up in the rankings and knock them down if UCF lose the remaining of their matches. The next one we have University of Waterloo against Guelph. I feel like that's just going to be a no-brainer that UW is going to take that one, especially because from what we've seen out of Guelph, they haven't really looked that hot against some teams that weren't really doing so great. So it's still tough to tell because they've only played 4 matches so far, and they've lost all 4 of them, but one was against Akron. Nova was looking pretty good, but OSU, they've only played 3 matches, so they did get a win against them there. Oh, no, that was actually OSU B team.
Scarlet.
So, yeah.
Scarlet, interesting little fact, Scarlet did beat Gray off stream and went to 5 games. So interesting little setup, and that actually knocked the A team, if you will, down to second last in the standings.
Which is, it's just insane that Scarlet, who are 3 and 4 right now, they have played more games, to be fair, but the main team for Ohio State, once they get all their matches, we'll be able to see a lot more of them. And I guess a lot of people expected better results from them. We also have Ohio State facing off against Miami University, which is Miami, Ohio. And that team looked solid at the beginning, but they also lost to UCF, I think it was, and Waterloo and Rutgers. So they're kind of struggling against some of these teams.
Yeah, the Rutgers loss was surprising, to say the least, for Miami, Ohio.
I don't know. Never mind. I was a mistake. They won those matches, so they won against Rutgers. My bad.
Are you sure?
Yeah, they
lost. Are
lost.
we looking at the same thing? Because they definitely lost to Rutgers.
They won against Rowan.
Yes, they beat Rowan.
Our tems. There's so many Ohio teams, and there's so many teams that have R at the beginning. There's Rutgers. There's RIT.
Rowan.
Gosh. Rowan.
Yes, the loss to Rutgers was surprising to say the least from Miami. Not what I expected. I don't know if they played with a sub in that game. I think they had some subbing issues recently. Either way, I hope they continue their season because they've taken down. One of the 2 losses that GVSU has suffered came in the hands of Miami. So. It certainly seems that Miami can do what they can. Anyway, Akron versus Michigan. That's a good matchup. I don't think Akron sweep Michigan, but I don't think Akron lose.
No, this might be their second game loss, but that's about all I can really say to that one, based on how well they've been performing against like every team.
Yes.
Oh gosh, they even 3-0'd UW, which is insane. Stockton versus Miami. I think Miami's going to take that one, just based on how we've seen them perform so far. Stockton, they're kind of middle of the pack, 3-3, but we still need to see more from that roster too. And I don't know, it's just going to be tough to tell with a lot of these teams because they haven't played too many matches compared to some of the other teams that are at the top.
Sure.
But let's quickly move on over to the west side. So we start to wrap things up and just go speed round through this section. The one team you could kind of see at the top, LSU, which are basically the Akron of the Western Conference. They have lost a bit more games, but they've also played a lot more. And they have plus 21 game differential, which is just insane.
Yes.
And I think they even beat the University of Arizona, if I'm not mistaken, on that one. No, that was Nebraska who did.
Yeah, Nebraska beat Arizona. That was a good match. But the thing about LSU is that they haven't played 4 of the top 5, in my opinion. In Arizona, they haven't played them yet. They haven't played Nebraska. They haven't played North Texas, and they haven't played UT Arlington.
Yep.
And those 5 games determine who is number 1. If LSU wins all 5, they are easily sitting at top of the standings. If they drop 2 or 3, all 4 of them, they could certainly fall down to that 5th spot, depending on how the rest of the things go. But that said, LSU, they've shown us that, yes, we are a top team. We can beat everybody else. Now we just got to prove it in week 3 against these better teams.
Yeah, and if they can do that, they're going to be looking so hot going into those regional playoffs, which will be great for them. And just looking at the matchups that we saw on stream last week, we had University of Missouri versus UCSB. That was kind of expected just because that was kind of the debut matchup of UCSB. Nebraska, we also, I think, agreed on them just taking down Utah Utes Black. And then UNT against UVU. That was kind of expected too, just because UNT are usually at the top. But the biggest one that we didn't quite expect, I think I predicted UTA taking it, but I didn't think it'd be a 3-0 against Nebraska.
I didn't expect Nebraska to look as badly as they did. It didn't look very good from them, but that's why UTA is kind of that dark horse team. I mean,
and they have a horse as
they have a horse as
last week.
Yes, we did. but I mean, they're that team that's just on the outside of the top 4, right? So, and with them beating Nebraska, potentially it slots them into that top 4. You never know. So, it's one team down for them. They've got to play again against LSU. I think they even need to play against Arizona and what have you. Yeah. But if they play the way they did on stream against Nebraska, it looks very good.
Yeah, so we'll see more out of all these teams next week, and the final week after that. Or I guess not next week, tonight. Because I keep forgetting it's Thursday and Friday that these matches are, and we only have 3 matches for the Western Conference this week, so that'll be a pretty nice ride to enjoy. CP Slow B against Utah Utes B. This one I was kind of like, okay, I think CP Slow have performed a bit better than Utah historically. So I'm thinking their B team will do a little bit better. And I think CP Slow B is actually higher in the standings than CP Slow. But that's only 2-1 because they've only played 3 matches. So still a lot more games to see out of them. But I think just based on these teams and their B teams, the battle of the B teams is basically what's going to be happening tonight.
Yeah, it'll be fun, I think, to watch that match. Certainly the first 2 in the West were the most difficult ones throughout the CRL for me to predict, just because I don't know how Cal Poly A matches up against Pomona. It's hard to tell because both of their play styles are relatively similar to one another.
Just like
well, yeah, similar names, of course. I mean, but they play very much the same, and I don't know which team has the advantage. You look at the standings, and Pomona is sitting in 8th at 2-2. Cal Poly A is a little bit lower, but that doesn't necessarily give Pomona the victory over top of them. I think I picked Cal Poly A just because I think they play a little bit faster than Pomona does. Yeah. But you never know. I mean, they haven't looked great this season.
But they played like the top teams.
Yeah,
so
of course.
They played.
You're right.
They played Arizona. They played LSU, A and B. They were a lot closer against the B team, obviously. And they played UNT. And then the team they 3-0'd, which is a team that was doing pretty solid against Nebraska, was UTA. So hard to tell right now. They could still end up at the top because they played a lot of their hardest matches so far, especially playing all those teams. So now it's just upwards for them. And that's why I voted for them. But obviously we could see Cal Poly Pomona. That was a mouthful. We could see them kind of step up to the plate too because they do have a better standing. So maybe that'll kind of motivate them a little bit more. And then the next matchup, UNT versus UCSB. It's UNT.
That's pretty straightforward. Yeah. If UNT drop that, then I have some serious questions. I think you and I actually got to watch Santa Barbara last week, right? Yeah, we did. Yeah. And
they didn't look terrible.
No, they didn't look terrible, but they didn't look good either. I mean, you and I had our criticisms for them in that matchup. And, from what I've seen from the things that I was told afterwards, they took it to heart and they played well, actually, against LSU. That was off stream, but they I think they took at least a map off of them. And, that's improvement for me. But when, even if you're making steady improvement, you're going up against North Texas. Any team is going to have difficulty, and I think Santa Barbara's no different.
Yeah, especially based on the history of these teams and the players and what we've seen. So once they get that out of the way, they'll have a lot more matches against more of their level of teams. I hate to say that, but there is definitely a differential between the top teams in CRL conferences and the bottom teams. Hopefully they perform well enough to make it into the top 8 that play in the regional playoffs, so they have another shot to make it all the way to the actual live event that'll happen. I believe that's just top 2 from each conference. But that is all the time we have for today. Hope you have enjoyed the show. Definitely look out on Twitter at Vaudible for more predictions threads that'll be happening there if you want to get involved with that. I'll usually release them around Wednesdays. Maybe this week I'll schedule them a little bit ahead of time so that we don't have to rely on lower results for the polls. And hopefully next week we'll be able to have more of the graphics ready and kind of see the scoring of who's been doing well for each of the regions, because that'll be neat to take that into account and kind of see how close we have been. But thank you all for tuning in. I have been Vaudible. Hunted has joined me as well as a lovely co-host. And we'll see you next week at the same time, 5 p.m. Central. And check us out on YouTube and Spotify. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.